gain a comprehensive understanding of the disintegration of a global power, we must journey back in time to the demise of another influential empire, namely the Russian Empire. The early 20th century saw a highly centralized empire with a strict social hierarchy that began to show signs of instability. In 1905, a revolution erupted against the Tsarist rule. Although the leadership managed to quell the uprising, it served as a warning that reforms were necessary for the regime's survival. Nevertheless, the Tsardom's longevity would not match Nicholas II's aspirations. In the house of the Romanovs, as in that of the Atrides, a mysterious curse descends from generation to generation. Murder and adultery, blood and mud, the fifth act of a tragedy played in a brothel. Peter I kills his son, Alexander I kills his father, Catherine II kills her husband, the block, the rope, and poison. These are the true emblems of the Russian autocracy. The fateful decision to engage in a war in 1914 had far-reaching and devastating consequences for Russia. The aftermath witnessed a series of events, including 2 revolutions, the Civil War, and the period of widespread famine from 1917 to 1920, ultimately leading to several decades of communist rule. In the year of 1917, and the Great War has been ravaging nations for 3 long years. In this backdrop of discontent and the fervent desire to end the war, Russia experienced its first significant transformation, the February Revolution. This momentous event resulted in the overthrow of the monarchy and the establishment of the provisional government, led by Alexander Kerensky. This interim government aimed to lay the foundation for a permanent democratic parliamentary system in Russia. However, its tenure proved to be short-lived. For some time before February 1917, the newspapers had been daily scanned with ever-increasing anxiety. Not only did it daily become more evident that there was much treachery and treason, but it seemed that the only one who could have put a stop to this state of affairs lacked either the wisdom or the courage, or both. Each time that the name of a newly appointed minister was read out, people looked at each other in amazement and then came to the never-varying exclamation: "What are they aiming at? A revolution?" Even before the date I speak of, thoughtful Russians had foreseen a revolution from below, but they hoped it would be staved off until the close of the war. The revolution which they now spoke of was one which they thought might prove merely a palace revolution. During this period, urban workers began to organize themselves into councils known as Soviets. Within these Soviets, revolutionaries voiced their criticism of the provisional government and its actions. The provisional government's unpopularity was further exacerbated by its decision to continue participating in World War I and its authoritarian measures, including the violent suppression of protests during the July days. Moreover, the government failed to effectively address the country's pressing issue. Consequently, in the second phase of the Russian Revolution, the Bolsheviks staged a bloodless coup in Petrograd, known as the famous Great October Socialist Revolution, or rather, Small November Communist Coup. overthrowing the provisional government. This marked the culmination of the Russian Revolution and heralded the rise of the Soviet regime. With the Bolshevik Party gaining substantial support within the Soviets, they established their own government known as the Russian Soviet Federative Socialist Republic. As the supreme governing party, the Bolsheviks embarked on reorganizing the former empire into the world's first socialist state. Their aim was to implement the principles of Soviet democracy both nationally and internationally. However, to reach these goals, consolidation was needed in Eastern Europe, where the situation was far from ideal at the time. During the time of the October Revolution, the world was still engulfed in the chaos of the Great War. German and Austro-Hungarian military forces had launched aggressive campaigns, penetrating deep into the territories of Ukraine, Belarus, and the Baltic regions of the former Russian Empire. Faced with escalating German military offensives, the Bolsheviks felt compelled to relocate the national capital from Petrograd to Moscow in a bid to safeguard their position. Yesterday evening's news, alleging that the Germans have already taken Petersburg, the newspapers are all in despair. Lunacharsky is even calling up high school students to enlist with the Red Guard to fight Hindenburg. So far, we are surrendering 35 provinces to the Germans and have lost millions of cannons, armored cars, trains, and shells. Driven by a strong desire for peace, the Soviet government officially initiated peace negotiations on November the 8th of 1917. These negotiations commenced on the 22nd of December and eventually led to acceptance of a treaty by the Soviet government in March. However, the terms of this treaty were far from favorable for Russia. Under its provisions, Russia was compelled to surrender control over Ukraine, as well as its Polish and Baltic territories, along with Finland. Nevertheless, it is important to note that the fate of these treaties took a dramatic turn with the declaration of the armistice on the 11th of November 1918. This momentous event marked the Allied forces' triumph over Germany, effectively bringing an end to World War I. Consequently, both the Ukrainian and Russian treaties were rendered null and void. The seizure of power by the Bolsheviks did not receive unanimous support in Russia, leading the country into a state of civil war. The two primary factions involved in the conflict were the Red Army, fighting to establish a socialist state under the leadership of Vladimir Lenin, and the loosely allied forces known as the White Army, which served as a political coalition encompassing right and left-wing opposition to Bolshevik rule. Additionally, rival socialist groups such as the Ukrainian anarchists of the Makhnovshchina and the left socialist revolutionaries engaged in hostilities against the Bolsheviks. 13 foreign nations also intervened against the Red Army. The intervention of the Entente powers in the Russian Civil War was driven by their opposition to Bolshevik ideology, their desire to protect their interests and investments in Russia, and their aim to re-establish an Eastern Front against the Central Powers during World War I. They saw the anti-Bolshevik forces as potential allies, both to contain the spread of communism and to safeguard their economic and geopolitical stakes in Russia. The intervention varied among the Entente powers, but collectively they sought to influence the outcome of the conflict and shape the future political landscape of Russia. By 1919, the White armies were in retreat, and by the beginning of 1920, they had been defeated on all fronts. While the Bolsheviks emerged victorious, the territorial boundaries of the Russian state had shrunk due to various non-Russian ethnic groups taking advantage of the chaos to pursue national independence. In March 1921, during a related conflict with Poland, the Peace of Riga was signed, dividing disputed territories in Belarus and Ukraine between the Republic of Poland and Soviet Russia. The Soviets attempted to regain control over all newly independent nations of the former empire, but their success was limited. Estonia, Finland, Latvia, and Lithuania successfully repelled Soviet invasions, while Ukraine, part of Belarus, as a result of the Polish-Soviet War, Armenia, Azerbaijan, and Georgia came under the occupation of the Red Army. By 1921, the Bolsheviks had suppressed Ukrainian national movements and occupied the Caucasus, although anti-Bolshevik uprisings in Central Asia persisted until the late 1920s. The Russian Civil War resulted in the loss of as many as 10 million lives, predominantly civilian casualties. The Cheka, the predecessor organization of the NKVD, executed thousands of perceived opponents of the Bolsheviks. Conditions for peasants were dire. Widespread disease, particularly typhus, was rampant, and Lenin's extensive grain confiscations led to widespread malnutrition. I went out for something to do and also to look good. People say that everything will be closed and that there will be nothing to buy. Sure enough, there's almost nothing in the stores that are still open. Sure enough, it has all vanished somewhere. By accident, I happened to run into a pile of fish in a store on Sofiskaya Street, but the price was outrageous. 28 rubles a pound. After the Civil War, the Declaration and Treaty on the Formation of the Union of Soviet Socialist Republics established the USSR, also known as the Soviet Union, officially centralizing political power in Moscow. This union brought together several Soviet republics that had already been in existence since 1919. The treaty, along with the declaration, was approved on the 30th of December 1922 by delegations from the Russian SFSR, the Transcaucasian SFSR, the Ukrainian SSR, and the Belarusian SSR. This allowed flexibility to admit new members, leading the USSR expanding from its founding 4 republics to 15 republics by 1940. The political system that emerged triumphant from the Civil War was called the Soviet Union. However, the Soviets held little significance as all power sided with the Communist Party, whose members occupied all positions within the Soviet of People's Commissars and key posts at lower levels of government administration. The party itself was governed by the Central Committee, with Lenin exerting dominant influence. The RSFSR's ascendance marked a significant turning point in Russian history, as it set the stage for the subsequent establishment of the Union of Soviet Socialist Republics, the USSR. This period witnessed profound political, social, and economic transformations, ultimately shaping the course of the 20th century. The breakup of the Russian Empire and the subsequent rise of the Soviet state had profound implications not only for Russia, but for the global geopolitical landscape as a whole. During the interwar period, significant political changes occurred in the USSR following Lenin's death in 1924, who in his two-part testament described Stalin as too rude and proposed that the Supreme Party leadership should remove him from the post of Secretary General. Intense power struggles and factionalism emerged within the Central Committee, characterized by cutthroat politics. Joseph Stalin, who held control over the Central Committee's secretariat, capitalized on his position to place his supporters or those aligned with his views in provincial committees. This ensured that delegations to party congresses and conferences would support him and his agenda. Initially, Stalin's leadership enjoyed widespread acceptance after Trotsky's exile. However, by the early 1930s, doubts began to arise among party officials due to the human cost associated with the implementation of the first five-year plan and the collectivization of agriculture. Fearing the potential loss of his position and the return of Trotsky, Stalin authorized the Great Purge. The purges were carried out by the NKVD, the USSR's secret police, targeting Central Party leaders, old Bolsheviks, government officials, and regional party leaders. Eventually, the purges extended to the Red Army and the military high command, where even the great mastermind of the Civil War and military reformist Mikhail Tukhachevsky was executed, resulting in severe consequences during the upcoming war. Scholars estimate that between 700,000 and 1,200,000 people died during the Great Purge. Stalin successfully removed his most powerful rivals, with Bukharin and Rykov being dismissed, and Zinoviev and Kamenev falling into disgrace and political obscurity, eventually leading to their execution. From 1927 until his death in 1953, Joseph Stalin wielded unparalleled political power, industrializing the Soviet Union, forcefully collectivizing agriculture, consolidating his position through extensive police terror, contributing to the defeat of Germany from 1941 to 1945, and expanding Soviet control over a belt of Eastern European states. Following Joseph Stalin's death in 1953, the Soviet Union entered a period of de-Stalinization under the leadership of Nikita Khrushchev. Khrushchev denounced Stalin's cult of personality and pursued a policy of peaceful coexistence with Western nations. His tenure was marked by economic policies such as the Great Virgin Lands Campaign. In 1964, Leonid Brezhnev assumed power, bringing stability, but also an era of economic slowdown known as the era of stagnation. The Eastern Bloc faced its own set of challenges, with revolutions erupting in the satellite states. Events like the uprisings in East Germany in 1953, Poznan and Hungary in 1956, Prague in 1968, and Poland in 1980-81 were clear indicators of these nations' discontent with Soviet dominance. Despite their expressions of dissatisfaction, Moscow extended its authority and suppressed these movements. In an attempt to address these issues, apart from pursuing detente with the West, Brezhnev introduced a policy of restricted sovereignty in relation to the Eastern European nations. The Soviet economy heavily relied on exports of natural resources, leading to inefficiency and corruption. The challenges faced during the Afghan War further stained the Soviet Union. Brezhnev remained in power until his death in 1982, leaving behind a legacy of political stability accompanied by economic stagnation.